Rashid cleared his throat and dusted off his hands as he stepped toward the stranger. He was trying to suppress the fear rising within him. In the dim yellow light of the shop, the stranger's presence felt oddly unsettling. The man was tall and lean, his black coat drenched with rain, giving off a faint, musty smell. But the most disturbing thing about him was his face, or rather, the absence of it. It felt as if a shadow covered the stranger's face, as though the light refused to touch him. Rashid couldn't muster the courage to look into his eyes for too long and quickly picked up his scissors and razor. "How would you like your haircut, sir?" Rashid asked with a nervous smile, trying to conceal his unease. The stranger settled into the chair and a low but chillingly cold voice said, "Just like the last time." Rashid's hands froze for a moment. "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. "Don't you remember?" The stranger said softly, "I've been here before." Sweat formed on Rashid's forehead. He was certain he had never seen this man before. Then what was he talking about? Maybe he was an old customer, but the eeriness in his tone suggested something far more sinister. Outside, the wind had picked up speed, causing the door to rattle gently. Steadying himself, Rashid draped a cloth around the stranger's shoulders and prepared to start shaving. But the moment he placed his hand on the man's hair, a strange sensation washed over him, like he wasn't touching a living person, but something lifeless. He shuddered but forced himself to focus. Spoke. "Have you ever seen a customer disappear after their last haircut?" Rashid's hands trembled. "What do you mean?" "Someone who sits before you, but the moment you finish, they're no longer there." The stranger's voice was unnervingly serious. Rashid turned his head slightly to glance at the man. And then his heart nearly stopped. The stranger had no reflection in the mirror. His pulse quickened. He turned around to look at the man again. He was sitting right there, looking completely normal. But in the mirror, there was nothing. No shadow, no outline, just emptiness. The ticking of the shop's clock suddenly felt unbearably loud, as if time itself had lost its rhythm. Outside, the street remained eerily silent, but the wind carried faint whispers, as if someone was repeatedly calling Rashid's name. "Just a little more to finish," Rashid muttered, trying to steady himself, but his hands were shaking. The stranger smiled faintly and whispered, "Hurry, time is running out." A cold chill ran down Rashid's spine. He quickly resumed cutting, but his fear deepened with every passing second. Who was this man? And why didn't his reflection appear in the mirror? A strange, suffocating tension began to fill the shop. Rashid's heart pounded loudly, but he tried to keep himself calm. The stranger's eyes weren't looking at the mirror. Instead, they were fixed directly on Rashid, as if watching his every move intently. "Time is running out," the stranger whispered again. Rashid quickly picked up the scissors and started cutting, but every time he glanced at the mirror, the stranger's reflection was missing. This was impossible. Every person had a reflection, but this man, what was he? Beads of sweat glistened on Rashid's forehead. Outside, the wind howled fiercely as if a storm was approaching. A thin layer of mist had settled on the shop's glass door, and beyond it, something vague and shadowy seemed to be moving. "Brother, where did you come from?" Rashid asked, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. The stranger paused for a moment, then, with a faint smile, replied, "I came from a place where those who go never return." A chill ran down Rashid's spine. The razor nearly slipped from his hand. "What do you mean?" Rashid's voice trembled. "Don't you remember?" The stranger lowered his head slightly. "This shop, this chair, this moment, it has all happened before. Rashid's mind started to spin. What was he talking about? He had served thousands of customers in this shop, but this man, why was he speaking so strangely? Look, I don't like jokes, Rashid said, trying to sound firm. This is no joke, Rashid, the stranger said in an icy tone. Recognize me, I have been here before. Rashid took a deep breath and studied the man closely, but he looked like a complete stranger. And then, suddenly, as if a fog lifted from his mind, a blurry memory began to surface. Years ago, a night just like this one, a stranger had come. He had looked similar. He had sat in this very chair for a haircut. But then, Rashid couldn't recall. Yeah, it was as if something was erasing his memory. Do you remember now? The stranger asked softly. Rashid quickly shook his head. No, I don't know you. But I know you, Rashid. The stranger's voice echoed deeply. I sat in this very chair and you gave me a haircut. But I never left this place. The shop's lights flickered for a moment. A flash of lightning lit up the street outside, and a strong gust of wind slammed against the door. Rashid's breathing grew rapid. He quickly set the radio, but his eyes gleamed with an unnatural glow. I am the one you last seated here, he whispered, but I never walked out of this shop. Rashid's eyes widened in terror. He stumbled backward, but suddenly, ting, ting! The shop's bell rang. Rashid snapped his head toward the door. Someone was standing outside. A shadow swayed within the mist, and when he turned back toward the mirror, the stranger was gone. The chair was empty, as if no one had ever been sitting there. The echo of the shop's doorbell still hung in the air. Rashid's heart pounded wildly. He stared at the mirror in disbelief, but the chair was empty, as if no one had ever been sitting there. How is this possible? Rashid stammered to himself, but the silence didn't last long. Suddenly, the razors, scissors, and combs in the shop began to tremble, as if struck by an unseen force. The glass of water on the table quivered then with a sharp jolt, fell to the ground, and shattered into pieces. Who's there? Rashid called out, his voice shaking. In response, only a whisper echoed through the shop, a voice distant yet surrounding him from all directions. Let me out. A chill spread through Rashid's body. The voice wasn't just a whisper at the door. Toke, 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 soft yet relentless. With trembling hands, Rashid stepped toward the door. The floor beneath his feet felt ice cold, as if the temperature in the shop had suddenly dropped. He peeked through the crack of the door. The street was empty. A thick fog hung in the air, and light raindrops pattered against the ground. But there was no one there. Rashid strained his ears. Somewhere in the wind, faint whispers drifted, countless voices murmuring, their words indistinct but eerily persistent. And then, with a forceful jolt, the door swung open on its own. A powerful gust of wind swept through the shop, sending loose newspapers and clumps of hair swirling into the air. The dim lanterns flickered, and then Rashid saw something that made his spine tingle with terror. In the mirror, the empty chair was no longer empty. The stranger had returned, but this time he was not alone. Behind him, shadowy figures stood. Countless, endless figures, their faces blurred, their eyes hollow like dark voids. They all loomed close to the mirror, watching Rashid as if trying to speak. And then the stranger slowly lifted his head, smiling, and whispered, I have returned, and this time I am not alone. The surface of the mirror cracked. A deep, splintering sound echoed as if something inside was trying to break free. Rashid let out a terrified scream and stumbled backward, but an invisible force held him in place. The shadows on the walls began to writhe. The whispers grew louder, turning into a chant. Let us out! Let us out! Rashid's breath came in ragged gasps. The shop itself felt alive. The chair, the scissors, the razors, everything shook violently. The mirror's cracks spread rapidly, its surface distorting. And then, with a deafening shatter, the mirror exploded into countless shards, scattering across the floor. The lights flickered once, then everything went black. The shop was shrouded in deep darkness. Everything was silent as if time had stopped. Shattered pieces of the mirror lay scattered on the floor, reflecting faint, flickering light. The eerie shadows on the walls had disappeared, and the unsettling whispers had faded into nothingness. Rashid's breathing was uneven. He lay on the ground, his body trembling, his hands still shaking. Slowly, he tried to gather himself and get up. What was that? He whispered to himself, but his mind couldn't grasp any clear answer. He looked around. Everything was in its place. The chair, the table, the tools, even the door was shut. But one thing was missing. The stranger. Where did he go? Rashid muttered, his voice quivering. The chair where the mysterious customer had been sitting was now empty. But there on the leather seat were stains of blood, fresh, red, and glistening. Rashid's throat went dry. He took a step back, but as his foot landed on a shard of broken glass, a sharp sound rang out. The shop's doorbell chimed again. A shiver ran through Rashid's body. His gaze snapped toward the door. His heart pounded harder. Outside, a shadow stood. Its figure was obscured by the mist, but it was there, just standing, as if waiting for an invitation. Who's there? Rashid's voice trembled. The figure outside moved slowly forward, and the door creaked open. In the dim yellow light, another customer stepped inside. He was wearing a black coat, his face damp with raindrops. Rashid's breath caught in his throat. The new customer silently walked in, sat down on the chair, and spoke in a slow, deliberate voice. "Give me the same haircut, the one you did last time." Rashid's eyes widened in terror. The same words, the same voice. But who was this man? Was it the same stranger who had vanished moments ago? Or was this someone else? Rashid took a step back. No, this isn't possible, he muttered under his breath. The new customer slowly lifted his head and looked into the mirror. But there was no reflection. A cold wave of fear shot down Rashid's spine. He let out a terrified scream and ran for the door. But just as he reached for the handle, the door slammed shut on its own. Thud! The lights in the shop started to dim. The whispers returned, growing louder, surrounding him, like countless voices echoing from within the walls. The customer in the chair smiled and spoke in a low, chilling tone. "Now it's your turn, Rashid." The lights went out with a sudden blast, and the last sound that filled the shop was Rashid's blood-curdling scream.